Let's talk about Robert Baltovich, a University of Toronto at Scarborough graduate whose life changed forever after he was wrongfully convicted for the murder of his girlfriend Elizabeth Bain. During the evening of June 19, 1990, Elizabeth had told her mother, Julita Bain, that she was going to check the tennis schedule on campus, as she was a student at the University of Toronto at Scarborough as well. Surprisingly, Elizabeth never returned home, which raised concern about her whereabouts. Her mother had then reported her daughter missing to police at 6:45 a.m. the next morning. Just 2 days later, Elizabeth's silver 1981 Toyota Tercel was found parked outside an auto body shop about a kilometer from her home. Forensics from the Metro Toronto Police Homicide Squad had found a large blood stain on the floor of the back seat, which, after some tests, was deemed to be that of Elizabeth's. The police began investigating and interviewing the friends and relatives of Elizabeth to gain insight on her whereabouts. On June 24th, Detective Sergeant Steve Reeser and Brian Raybould questioned Baltovich for several hours, in which there were 10 discrepancies found in his version of events, according to Reeser. Baltovich was then put under surveillance and was considered to be a potential suspect in his girlfriend's murder case. The police's theory behind Elizabeth's disappearance was that Baltovich had killed her and hid her body in Colonel Danforth Park near a wooded area. 3 days later, he returned to retrieve her body and drove her car to the lake to dispose of it. The forensic evidence from the car did not support this theory whatsoever, which evidently foreshadows the lack of real evidence against Baltovich. Over the summer of 1990, police, along with Elizabeth's family, friends, and volunteers, had conducted massive searches throughout ravines, wooded areas, and creeks all over the Toronto area. Despite the searches, Elizabeth's body has yet to be found till this day. Also during the summer of 1990, the hypnotically enhanced memory method was used amongst witnesses who saw Robert or Elizabeth before she disappeared. Witnesses were then hypnotized and then questioned about their recollections. On July 11, 1990, what would have been Elizabeth's 23rd birthday, her parents, Ricardo and Julita Bain, held a press conference in the backyard of their Toronto home. They pleaded for their daughter's return and for her abductor to bring her home, or at the very least, reveal where her body was left. A few weeks later, Baltovich's house was searched and his car was impounded by police. Several letters, personal items, and gifts were seized, and his house phone had also been bugged. Exactly 5 months after Bain's disappearance, Robert Baltovich was arrested and charged with first-degree murder of Elizabeth Bain. Baltovich's trial began on February 4, 1992, before Justice John O'Driscoll. Over the course of 6 weeks, jurors heard testimonies from over 100 witnesses, bringing down Baltovich's charge to second-degree murder, in which he pled not guilty. Crown Attorney John McMahon depicted Baltovich as an obsessive boyfriend who murdered Bain as a result of her efforts to break up with him. McMahon stated Baltovich had a jealous mindset, one that thought, if I can't have her, no one can. The Crown's case mainly consisted of the testimony of 2 witnesses by the names of Marianne Purse and David Dibben. Marianne stated she had seen both Baltovich and Bain sitting together at a picnic table on campus at 5:40 p.m. on the day of her disappearance. However, Robert maintained his innocence, suggesting that he was at home with his family at the time. Many of his family members backed up his statement and confirmed that this was true. David had stated that he had seen Baltovich driving Bain's car on June 22nd, which ultimately pointed towards Baltovich as the killer. Defense lawyer William Gatward suggested that evidence was weak and could easily point to other suspects, referring to the unidentified blonde man that several witnesses had reportedly seen her with before she went missing. Gatward also brought up the Scarborough rapist and mentioned that his last victim was in May of 1990, just before Bain's disappearance. Despite Gatward's efforts, on March 31, 1992, Robert Baltovich was convicted of second-degree murder by the jury. Bain's parents, Ricardo and Julieta Bain, had received the closure they were looking for, as Baltovich was sentenced to life in prison. Robert was certainly shocked and devastated, as he believed Elizabeth was the love of his life. It was clear that Elizabeth felt the same, as testimonies, including one from Bain's mother herself, mentioned that she had gifted Robert with flowers, a watch, and a poem as a graduation present the day before she disappeared. It was in May of 1992 when Robert's new lawyer, Brian Greenspan, had filed an appeal of the case on the grounds of existing problems with the judge's address to the jury and the use of hypnotically enhanced memory testimony of witnesses. Baltovich is denied bail pending his appeal. In February of 1993, Paul Bernardo is charged in connection with the Scarborough rapes. A private investigator by the name of Brian King was asked by Baltovich's lawyer to focus on any evidence that could potentially relate Bernardo to Bain's murder. A few months later, King revealed to the Toronto Star newspaper that he recently discovered shocking findings that could potentially help free Baltovich. On September 1, 1995, Paul Bernardo is found guilty on 9 charges relating to the rapes and murders of 3 women. This included his wife's sister, Tammy Homolka, and high school students Leslie McAfee and Kristen French. He is sentenced to life in prison and declared a dangerous offender. In May of next year, Baltovich's lawyers submit a 113-page memorandum to the Ontario Court of Appeal, which contained fresh evidence obtained between 1992 and 1996. It does not directly refer to Paul Bernardo, but it does mention that another individual, rather than the appellant, committed the offense based on new evidence that relates to the evidence presented at the trial of the Scarborough rapist. On March 15, 2000, defense lawyer from Innocence Canada and the director of the Association in the Defense of the Wrongfully Convicted, James Lockyer, had joined Baltovich's defense team. A 300-page defense brief is then filed with the Ontario Court of Appeal. During his bail hearing, his lawyers presented new evidence pointing towards the innocence of Baltovich, indicating that Paul Bernardo was the killer. They argued that Baltovich should be released on bail while he waits for his appeal. As the details of the new evidence were sealed due to a publication ban, private investigator Brian King described it as more than just forensic evidence. It also included further interviews and information that had been brought up since trial. Exactly 8 years after being convicted of murdering his girlfriend, on March 31, 2000, Robert Baltovich is released on bail pending an appeal of his conviction. He expressed gratitude and relief as he described the horrors of his prison experience. Justice Mark Rosenberg stated that Baltovich's lawyer, James Lockyer, had urged him to review the case on the basis that Baltovich is a potential innocent man who was wrongfully convicted. In April of 2003, Justice Mark Rosenberg declared that James Lockyer will be unable to participate in the portion of the Baltovich appeal where Paul Bernardo will be depicted as the real killer. This was due to the fact that Lockyer had represented Bernardo from 1996 to 1997. However, it was agreed that one of Baltovich's other lawyers, Brian Greenspan, would represent him with regards to the Bernardo-related aspects of the case, while Lockyer would represent him in all other aspects. 12 years after his original trial, on September 20, 2004, the Ontario Court of Appeal begins a hearing for Robert Baltovich's conviction. In December of the same year, the Ontario Court of Appeal orders a new trial for Baltovich. It was ruled that the trial judge's charge to the jury was unfair and had significant legal errors that were prejudicial to Baltovich. As a result, Baltovich's lawyer had asked the Court of Appeal for an acquittal. However, the court was not convinced that it was necessary due to the fact that there was new evidence that still could lead to a conviction from a properly instructed jury. In 2005, Ontario's Ministry of the Attorney General announced that Baltovich will face a completely new trial for the murder of Elizabeth Bain, with a charge of second-degree murder once again. Before Robert's new trial began, after the case of R.V. Trochen, the Supreme Court of Canada held that from that moment onwards, eyewitness evidence derived from hypnosis had such a despicable reputation that it would not be admissible in court. Given this decision, it was clear that Mary Ann would not be able to testify again at Robert's retrial. The same would go for Suzanne Naden, another key eyewitness whose original evidence had also been extremely weak. She had stated that she might have seen a woman who resembled Elizabeth through some trees at night, but through hypnosis, her memory had sharpened. On April 22, 2008, Robert Baltovich was found not guilty by a Toronto jury on the first day of his second trial for the murder of his girlfriend Elizabeth Bain. Crown prosecutors began their submissions by presenting no evidence, despite their earlier statements, which included at least 50 witnesses. When Innocence Canada took on Robert's case, they found several issues with the court proceedings. First, the judge had disproportionately instructed the jury members in such a way that persuaded them to sway with the Crown's case and belittle the facts of Robert's case, rather than encourage them to take a balanced view. The judge had also left out important cautionary statements that questioned the reliability of the prosecution's eyewitness testimony, which could have led the jury to put too much focus on that evidence. Innocence Canada also stated that evidence derived from hypnosis should have been inadmissible due to the fact that hypnosis is a controversial technique that can affect one's memory in unpredictable ways. These were amongst many of the problems brought forward to the Court of Appeal to help Robert's case. The court had agreed with Innocence Canada's arguments suggesting that Robert's trial was unfair. They also mentioned that the judge's tone, especially his improper use of rhetorical questions, was inappropriate and clearly showed his bias towards the Crown's case. The judge instead should have used a neutral tone, which would have allowed jury members to be free from bias and decide on the verdict themselves. Further, the court also agreed that the trial judge had not given the jury adequate information regarding the eyewitness identification evidence involving the two key Crown witnesses, Mary Ann Purrs and David Dibbin. The court noted that both their descriptions of Robert had significantly changed over time, and that David had not been able to get a proper look at the person driving Elizabeth's car. It was also noted that Mary Ann had seen a Toronto Sun article with Robert's photo and had spoken to Elizabeth's family members who believed he was the killer. It was only after she went under hypnosis that she picked out Robert's image from a photo lineup. The jury was not informed of these facts by the judge, and so the lack of context before the trial played a major role in Baltovich's conviction. Robert's trial judge chose to promote the Crown's case against him, in which the jury's decision was heavily influenced upon. Without a fair and balanced charge, Baltovich is denied of his right to receive a fair trial, which is protected under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. The overall case against Robert was based on unreliable eyewitness testimony. As mentioned earlier, following the R.V. Trochen case, the Supreme Court made it clear that there is no place in the court for hypnosis or any other forms of dangerous techniques that alters memory. There is a general knowledge that any increase in accurate memories during hypnosis is accompanied by an increase in inaccurate memories, and that hypnosis may alter one's ability to distinguish memory from imagination. Subjects also often report being more certain of their memories after they've gone through hypnosis, regardless of their accuracy. Overall, hypnosis increases the chances of our memories changing due to outside influences, where in some cases we end up remembering things that never actually happened. Therefore, hypnosis greatly emphasizes the dangers of tampered eyewitness testimonies. In addition to the unreliable eyewitness testimonies due to hypnosis, the police who were investigating Elizabeth's disappearance had provided a faulty photo lineup for Marianne Purse. Marianne was showed a photo array where all images are presented at once rather than a sequential lineup where images are presented one at a time. This photo lineup technique can be very dangerous, as witnesses may simply choose the picture that works best, even if none of the photos actually match the real culprit. Marianne actually stated during Robert's trial that she had picked out his photo as a result of a process of elimination. To make matters worse, the officer who conducted the lineup knew that Robert's photo was included and had informed Marianne himself before she made her decision. Lineups are supposed to be conducted by members who do not know information such as this, so that the witness can clearly make their decision without bias or prior knowledge. By sharing the information with Marianne, the officer presented the potential to convey information to the witness to cause her to select the suspect that the police have in mind. Another factor leading to Baltovich's wrongful conviction was the suppression and manipulation of evidence by Detective Brian Raybould. It was revealed in the retrial that Detective Raybould had an untitled loose paper which had information from a meeting with forensics who stated that the car had more blood than there should have been from a body that had been decomposing for 2 or 3 days. If the police's theory on Baltovich were true, the blood would have been darker with a stronger odor. Therefore, the evidence of fresh blood on the car seat disproved the police's theory altogether. Raybould also falsified his notes to conceal the meeting's existence by removing certain pages and replacing them with pages from later dates. Lastly, the Crown attorneys were also guilty of tunnel vision, in which they were too determined to convict Baltovich instead of solve Elizabeth's murder. This was seen through their ignorance towards Paul Bernardo as a potential suspect, as well as the manipulation of evidence by Detective Raybould as mentioned. After losing the love of his life, Robert Baltovich spent 8 years in prison for a murder he did not commit. Not only were his attempts to reintegrate back into society frustrating and slow, but his attempts to go back to his normal life were evidently unsuccessful. In his own words, Robert lived through an 18-year nightmare.